Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Jerrold McGrath from Toronto. He's a repeat guest, and I'm glad you're here, Jerry. And I know you have been a bit busy guy for the last year since we last talked, and I'd love to catch up with you and find out what you've been doing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, and thank you so much for the invitation to come back. Yeah, I had a really good time last time we chatted, and a lot of good things have come out of that conversation.
Oh,
So
good.
I'm real excited to be here. To think about what I've been doing since we last talked, that's a big task. But I'll jump into a few things, and then we can see where the conversation takes us. But so most of my work is around the question of culture for what's coming. And what that means is the belief that the way that we are organizing ourselves, the way we are in relation with each other, will necessarily need to change to make sense of the bigger changes that are happening in the world around us. Specifically looking at rising authoritarianism, at the introduction of AI and artificial intelligences in different places, climate change. And it's not so much about like, yelling about whose fault it is or getting into that side of things, but how do we need to be in relation? Like how do we need to live together to produce culture, yeah, in order to live alongside these changes? And so one thing I'll talk about is in June, we were invited. So I'm with an organization called Ukai Projects. We were invited to do some work in Iceland, in Reykjavik, and by an organization called SIM. And SIM is a visual arts body. They invite international artists to come to Iceland and present works. And we proposed something a bit different to them. We had basically we were in an old dairy farm for a month, and we were invited to install and exhibit some works. And one of the questions we had, so like when we landed in Iceland, for those who don't know, there's a lot of active volcanoes that happen in Iceland at different times. And as we were flying in, it was like 4 in the morning. It was not a great time to be awake. But this little girl in the seat in front of me, she looks at the window and she starts screaming, "Volcano, volcano!" And I look at the window and there's a volcano erupting. Like you can actually see the like the red light and the smoke. And this is all happening near Blue Lagoon, which is not too far from the airport. And so one of the questions we asked people when we got there was like, how do you live alongside these things? Like, how do you build a culture, build a community, build a home, knowing that at any minute things can kind of go boom? And most people just sort of laughed because it was such a part of their day to day that they barely even thought about it. And so our project in Iceland was sort of related to this in that we're being asked to live alongside these other massive changes. Like we're being asked to figure out what it means to live with climate change or with AI or with governments that are increasingly insecure about what the future is going to look like. And we need to figure out how to live alongside these things, like the people in Iceland live alongside volcanoes. So the project was we had 6 artists we invited them to bring ruins of potential futures. And what that means is they sort of cast themselves forward and say, all right, what might our future look like? And then to create an artifact, a ruin from that potential future. And then we placed them in this giant dairy farm, this massive space. It was absolutely gorgeous. And then in the second week, we invited 6 artists from Iceland to come in, and they were invited to make a home amongst these ruins. And so the sort of the question of what does it mean to make a home among changes about which we have very little control. And it was really, really beautiful to watch these artists try to make sense of these things that we'd placed. And many of them were quite we'll say hostile to making a home. Some of them were quite noisy, unpredictable. And yet they managed. One artist who I thought it was beautiful, he was driving home from the exhibition space after our first meeting. We shared a meal together, and he saw these giant neon signs from a steakhouse that used to be in Reykjavik. And he went to this. It was a yard, like a junkyard, and he asked the guys, "Can I have those?" And he says, "Yeah, yeah. If you can get rid of them, like if you can take them, you can have them." And he took them, and so he set them up around the space, and there were these giant neon lights that he had done some playful things with. And we asked him, well, like, what does this mean? What does this have to do with home? But he says, well, for me, home is lamps. So I wanted to give this giant space some lamps. And so he built these giant neon lamps. And one of them had the word restaurant, and he just lit the letter aur. And I guess in Icelandic, I mean, this is something I learned later, that is a word that's used for like silt or sand after a flood, or it's also the word used for small amounts of money. And so there was this like lovely piece, and anyway, it was a wonderful experience. And so the project was about how do we make sense of like how do we live alongside changes? How do we represent those changes in ways that people can step into them? Because often these conversations are very, very polarized. There are two positions, and you have to choose one or the other. And if you don't, then you're an enemy of everyone. And we're like, that's not a very interesting way of making sense of these changes. And so we wanted to figure out ways of inviting people in. And so what we did is after the Icelandic artists situated their works, we then had a public exhibition for 2 weeks, and we had good numbers because the national radio picked up on the project, and we got some press coverage as well. And then we invited families, people interested in art, people just wandering by, to come in, and they were then invited to make a home amongst these ruins as well. And some found that to be really like fun and refreshing. Others found it very frustrating because it wasn't how they were used to engaging with art or with culture. But all the feedback we got then feeds into the work that we do after that.
So did the experience change how you view home?
Yeah, actually. I mean, I think often like our ideas of home are built on stories that we sort of internalize over a long period of time. And so like growing up, I was raised by a single mother for most of my life. And so home to me was always very portable. Like we moved a lot. And so home for me was like the ability to pack easily and to settle in a new place. I went to like 6 different elementary schools. So home also, there was a certain ephemerality or a certain volatility to the idea of home. And I think we're gonna have to figure out what new models of home involve as we change the world around us. And it's not an indictment, like the world's always changing. We're always figuring out other ways of sort of building culture. Um, but but right now the question's a particularly pressing one. And I think there's a lot of incentives to try to tell people that things aren't changing that much. Like old models of home still work. We can still continue to do things as we have. And I think the inconsistencies or the dissonance between that and the reality that we're experiencing is starting to become a bit sharper. So we better start figuring out what culture for what's coming looks like.
And it would appear to me that if we're going to sort of reimagine what home is, that we're also reimagining what family is.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think that's a. I mean, I forget the article. It was in the Atlantic a few years back, but it was basically talking about how our current preoccupation with the nuclear family has shifted the responsibility to care for more distant relations onto institutions who are often really poorly equipped. I lost a family member since we last talked, who was very isolated. Was suffered from multiple sort of health concerns, and really there weren't a lot of folks there to support her. And I think we're increasingly seeing that we have narrowed our idea of what family involves. Like it's my partner, it's my children, sometimes my parents, but beyond that, like my cousin who's having problems, I don't know. I don't always feel as connected to their concerns, and I worry about this because this narrowing of family is turning over to sort of government and corporate institutions the work of caring for people that we ought to be doing. And I admit I'm not like I wish I were better. I find it very freeing to sort of not be deeply concerned about all of my relations in different ways. But I acknowledge that it's probably not a sustainable way of going forward. And COVID, I think, was a huge signal of that. Like the people that didn't have access to care, struggled quite a bit more than those that had extended networks and relationships to support them.
Yeah, I saw that as well. You know, I'm in a very tight family. We're scattered, but we're tight. We talk almost every week or several times a week. Both my sisters and my children. Um, and I this year I moved back to my hometown, so I'm reconnecting with the home that I knew as a child, as a high school students, and so those friends, some of those friends have reemerged into my life. And I bought a house. I bought a house bigger than any house I've ever owned. Um, and so I have two rooms in this house that are for guests, and so it's a home for the other, quote unquote, for the person who needs a home for a period of time, and they're welcome to come stay with me. Well, I'm not prepared for them yet, but that's where it's headed because I see that one of the things that those of us who are responsible people can take on the care of our neighbors and take on the care of other people. And that's, so that's kind of what, so when you're talking about this exhibition in Iceland about home, I'm going through all this in my own head of what is it do I think about that, um, and I'm still trying to figure that out.
Well, I forget who it was, Hegel maybe, that said like that ritual is a way of making a home in the world. And so I think there's some
Oh yeah,
dance that I'm keen to sort of explore, because I think we've given up some of our capacity to sort of give shape to the world, because we inherit so many models about what things mean and what they are. And so it's a bit, to me, it's a bit about agency and autonomy, like giving ourselves permission to say, okay, I think this is what this means. I think this is what this means. And not to sort of, I think often this can be used as a way of justifying like conspiracy beliefs or things like that sort of explain the world in ways that are aligned with how I'd like it to be. Like I'm not arguing for that, but I do think we need to take greater ownership over what things mean, because we too often turn that work over to others, and they have their own interests in mind. And so I think, yeah, more of a Václav Havel and his views on ideology, I think are important to me, because we need to make I mean, it's the most human thing we can do, right? Is to see the world and decide what it means. And turning that work over to other people seems like a sad thing to give up, because it's such a gift.
You're familiar with this construction that people have used of place, where the first place is home, the second place is work, and the third place is a social gathering place. And it sounds like you're working at at the edges of those three entities, if that's the right, I don't know what the right word is. But to me, it seems like those three things are actually coming together. I look at this house. It's my office is in this house. I have a space that I intend to create as a third place for people to come. We can have, have a meal together. It becomes a third place for conversation. And it's also a place that my children can come and bring their children. And but I see these three things kind of coming together out of necessity, because the life is so complex, and this is where the complexity can be simplified in some way.
Yeah, I feel that. And I think that it can go in a few different directions. Like I think we can feel squeezed into spaces, like they get mushed up together because there aren't other opportunities. And so we need to be really thoughtful about how we design these spaces so that people don't like I hear a lot in the arts where I work about third spaces and how arts spaces are third spaces, and often they're not.
Right.
You have to pay to be there. You can't talk. You got to be quiet and listen to whatever's happening on the stage or on the screen. Like they're really not social spaces, and they're really not third spaces by any definition I know of. And then we lose the other ones, right? And so then it becomes a burden, not a burden, but the responsibility of private individuals to cultivate that kind of conviviality or connection. And for folks that enjoy that, that's great. And for folks that are invited into those spaces, it's wonderful. But lots get left behind too. And so it's yeah. I think we need new models. Like we just need new ways. I remember reading that in the like 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even people would walk home from work and it would take them an hour and a half, and not because it was far, but because they had a lot of people to talk to. And they had, they buy groceries, they'd pick things up, and none of it was like there was no automated teller, and or even if there's a human being nowadays, they feel like an automated teller sometimes, but there was always conversation, there was always community, and so that really changed people's like experience of time. And I think we need to figure out ways of reintroducing that. We need to create these sort of holding spaces where it's not all about efficiency and getting there more quickly. Because otherwise we're going to get real lonely, and then when bad things happen and we're lonely, then there's nobody there to help out. And yeah, and the sort of the bad things, like the unexpected things that shake up the world, they seem to be coming a bit more quickly. So I would, yeah, I think we need to explore all kinds of different ways of being in place together, and some of it's online like this, which is great, and some of it's going to be in person, but we definitely need some imagination applied to these cultural technologies.
Yeah, I see my podcast as a virtual third place, and the conversation is unscripted, but what it really means is that we're just hanging out and we're talking about the things that are important to us, and they don't have necessarily any institutional or cultural obligation to the conversation. It was just we talk about what we want to talk about.
Exactly, exactly. And then others will have their own opinions on it, and then hopefully something grows out of that. And I think that's what's wonderful.
Yeah, it is, and at least it has been for me because I get to have some really amazing conversations with people, and I get to meet people that I have admired from afar, but now I get to know them as persons, and I think that's part of the challenge that we face is how do we actually know people as persons, and um, and while there may not be a simple answer to that, the fact that it is a question, I think, is why I have hope for the future, is that we're going to answer that question because it's important to us to answer it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually think that one thing about like AI and the proliferation of AI, one of the positives is it's caused this real renewed interest in like philosophy of the self and the interior life, and yeah, questions that maybe we just sort of took for granted, because it's like I know these things are different than I am. I know these whatever smart machines are different, but I can't really put my finger on why. And then when we dig into it, we start to say, okay, well, this is it, right? Like persons, there's something about a mind, a consciousness looking out from a body, from a place, that has different qualities than code. But we need to figure out how to talk about that, because the desire to sort of use these machines in different places is because we've given up some of those aspects of self or personhood, that we used to take for granted. So yeah, I think any of these changes, they trigger good reflections and sometimes not so good reflections, but I feel like some good conversations are coming out of it.
Are there people that you were looking to as kind of leading the way in that regard? Things that they're saying that you find really helpful that maybe the rest of us could benefit from?
I mean, I'm going to be honest and say that I think a lot of the work that I go to is people that are already dead. Like I think, like I look at Camus as someone who was trying to make sense of a world post World War II, and the Plague was one of the most read books during COVID for obvious reasons, but I think all of his work is is entering into conversations that we need to be having again. This idea that the recognition that life is absurd, it can't be an end, like it has to be a beginning.
Mhm.
And not to say that life is absurd, but that a lot of people feel like meaning is harder and harder to get their hands on. And how do you deal with that? And he was dealing with post-war Europe, and so he was asking these questions, and I think they're applicable today. I think I may have mentioned last time I'm a huge fan of Mikhail Bakhtin, who is a Russian cultural theorist. And he was a fan of like the novel as a way of making sense of changes. Because in a novel, you have all these different characters that represent different ways of knowing the world, and they're in dialogue. And in really good books, like those pieces get held in a kind of tension or structure that we can inhabit and take from. In bad books, of course, there's it's a winner and a loser, and yeah, it's there isn't much complexity to it, but I love his work around that. I think there are writers now. I would be cautious about sort of naming any because I think we're all sort of caught up in the present moment, and who's reflecting on it well will be a question that gets answered maybe after the fact. I will say actually, I will say that I'm I lived in Japan for many years. And Japanese fiction right now, like literature, like contemporary modern writing in Japan, is absolutely incredible for exploring some of these themes. I'm thinking of like Banana Yoshimoto and people like that. They write these tender, short, beautiful little stories that dig very deeply into individual lives, but in the process, they sort of reveal broader issues around sort of isolation and connection and disconnection and so I think the novelists in many ways are doing the good work of making sense of the world. In terms of like theorists, I'd have to think about that. Probably not going to come to mind super quick. There are people where aspects of their work I really like, but there's no one that I would say, yeah, go check out this person because they've got it figured out.
Well, it appears to me that the people who are are going to have that kind of impact are still working at figuring out what they're wanting to say,
Yeah.
and
And they're
that
working within, oh, sorry, go ahead.
and that emergent character of living your life and trying to make sense of it is where that those insights come from. That when they share it, touches somebody, and they take that and they run with it. And they find something that they discover in their own experience because of someone else's experience. I think that's how we're connecting together, and maybe in a very slim, thin way, but we're still connecting together because one person's experience has some relevance to another person's, even though they don't have any real connection to each other.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think there also these people are they're trying to figure out how to live in the world, and that always complicates things. Like when we look back at thinkers, like the material conditions of their life are less present, and we're left with their work. And right now we're like there's people I admire, but I don't always admire how they make their money, or who they choose to work for, and like and questions that feel very pressing right now, but maybe in 20 years won't be as present, or they'll be resolved in some way. So yeah, I think there's an openness to the current moment. But I mean, I'll say like I like Byung-Chul Han, who's a German writer, Yukui. Like there's some wonderful work coming out, but yeah, we're all sort of pulling at strings and and trying to see what's at the end of it. And we're in the middle of it still, so we won't know what's at the end of it for a little bit. But
Should we then see the present moment not as a time of dread, but a time of opportunity?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we talk. So I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but like we have an event coming up in October. It's our carnival, and it's the Carnival of Shipwreck. And the idea of shipwreck is from a Spanish philosopher, Jose Ortega y Gasset, who's writing in the early 20th century.
Mhm.
And he said basically that like being alive is like being in a shipwreck, and you find yourself in the water. And then culture is the swimming stroke. But that over time, when we sort of get comfortable in our culture, we get burdened by what he called parasitic and lymphatic matter, and it makes it harder and harder for us to swim. And right now, I think we're seeing that we're in the water, and all the things that had carried us for the last century or so are probably not going to be super helpful in making our way out of the water. But it's still there, right? It's really, really tempting to hold on to, like the idea of a nuclear family, or the idea of, travel as emancipatory, or whatever it is, like certain patterns that maybe aren't sustainable. And so we need to figure out how to swim again. And to me, that's exciting. Like, I think the idea that we get the possibility of creating culture that points forward is so exciting for me. Obviously it's also very fraught, because it's not a rejection of what came before. It's like a reapplication of ideas to new conditions. So that's exciting, but it's scary. Like, it's scary to be the same for everybody, because some people are kind of used to being in the water. The whole systems that they're in have created multiple moments where they feel like they're sort of alone in the water after a shipwreck. But for like me, I most of my life has been relatively comfortable. So the thought of being in the water is a scary one, but it's also an exciting one, because it means we get to build something new.
Tell us a little bit more about this event that you're holding. What's going to happen there? What can people sign up for that? Or is it
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
what?
What is it? Yeah.
Give us the pitch on why we should get on a plane and come to Toronto for your event.
For sure. Yeah. So Carnival is an interesting thing. It has a very long history. Some people track it back to Saturnalia in Rome, and earlier still. And the idea is that it's a moment in time where we celebrate the possibility of change. So not specific changes, but the possibility of change. And this shows up in different ways. Like there's a carnival king, which is usually like a reversal. The person who's considered socially marginal becomes socially centered, and then people in the middle, the kings and the priests, are brought down. They're ridiculed. They're laughed at. It's a celebration of body. So it's about eating. It's about dancing. It's about drinking. It's about all the things that we do with our bodies. Um, and it's outside of the day to day. And so I think we're in a time right now where people they love the idea of revolution. They love this idea of, we're going to turn everything upside down, and we'll start anew. But revolutions have this nasty habit of just kind of strengthening the structures that were previously in place. Nothing changes, right, except for the boss. And so the idea of carnival is, well, we just need to step outside of the systems we're in now and then to be able to imagine what a better or more beautiful life could be. And then we can go back to the world, back to our work, and bring that with us. And so our carnival is in that mode. Our theme this year is shipwreck. We have over 70 artists and other folks that are going to be involved. We obviously, there's performances, art exhibits, art exhibitions, but there's also performance lectures. We're bringing in some brilliant people to share their ideas. And then we've been working with them over the last few months to make it all into a coherent whole. We have local people coming in as provocations to say, like, yeah, sure, we're thinking abstractly and in this way, but let's think about where we are and the community we're in and the place we're in. And we have multiple sites within our neighborhood in Toronto that we're activating as a part of this. So it's last year was the first year we had about 350 folks through. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of chaos, a lot of disorder. And we're excited to be doing another year of it. But yeah, and that tends to be the organizing theme in a lot of our work is rather than the urges that sort of bring us into a center, like these sort of centripetal forces. We're interested in centrifugal. How do we spin things out? How do we give people a chance for release? And that's what we're looking at from October 23rd to 26th. And yeah, we're excited for folks to come out if they're in Toronto, and if they want to come to Toronto, hit us up and we can see what we can do, because Toronto is not it's not always an affordable place to stay in. So we're trying to work out arrangements to help people make it possible.
And by what you're saying, it sounds like you have a lot of people from your neighborhood or your community who are participating at a level of contribution that is more than showing up and just being a part.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's we're in this neighborhood called the Garment District, which used to be a center for fashion and textiles before that. There used to be clubs in the neighborhood, then it was more offices. After COVID, people started working from home. So in Toronto right now, I think there's 11 million square feet of vacant commercial space. It's very difficult to turn that over to other uses. So we've occupied an old marketing office in that community. And then we're working alongside a number of other sort of cultural organizations in our community. We're right neighboring against the old Chinatown in Toronto, which is getting a lot of pressure to like gentrify and change. And so we're working alongside them. There's a lot of folks that are street involved or unhoused in our neighborhood or adjacent to our neighborhood. So we're working with organizations that support those communities as well. And so yeah, we really wanted to be grounded in place. And so we're talking about big things and we're dreaming big, but we're always bringing it back to the here and the now and the place. Because if it's just abstract, it's it's fun, it's wonderful, it's ideas, but we really want to see this applied. And so that's the dream, is to have people come in, and then whether they live in the neighborhood or whether they bring it back to their own communities, that the possibility of change becomes present for them.
And so it kind of at the core of this is the idea that all these manifestations of the carnival are really is another way of saying this is how we are a kind of a new form of home for one another.
Yeah. Or an old form of home renewed.
Or an old form of home renewed. Yes.
Yeah, like one of the challenges, like there's a lot of these sort of alternative spaces. Like yeah, I look at Burning Man and things like that. And I think they do good things, but they're really not welcome to everybody. Like it's a particular subculture that shows up at these things. And we really don't want that. Like at our events, when we have seniors, when we have kids, when we have, different abilities, different backgrounds, different cultural traditions in space together, that's a win. Like they were like, yes, that's what we want. We want everybody in that neighborhood to say, okay, yeah, I would be welcome at this event, and that the people that show up don't make anyone feel like they don't belong. That's one of our sort of one of the behaviors that we try to model, is that like there are a lot of folks that can struggle in social environments. There's people that feel isolated, and we need to work hard to make sure that they feel welcome and they come back. And so that's a big part of what we do at Carnival. And then accessing that is, we all have bodies, we all come from places, and centering the body and centering place provides a foundation that's shared. Not everybody's interested in AI, not everybody's interested in art or technology, but everybody eats, everybody dances, everybody moves, everybody comes from somewhere. And so that's what we want to put at the center.
Do you get any pushback for this?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. We get, there's just a lot of mistrust, right? They're like, well, I don't know what they want. Like, I think they're up to something, I think is the general sentiment.
Okay.
And
That's an important recognition.
yeah. Yeah. And so I mean, we just keep trying to be consistent in what we do and how we do it. And people are eventually, and I get it. Like I understand mistrust. Like there are people that say they're about community and all these things, and really they're just there to take. That isn't the game we're playing. Like we're doing this because we think it's the role. This is what art and art making needs to be. But yeah, we do definitely get some pushback on that.
That's great. And you have you and some others have just published a book.
Yeah, because clearly we're not busy enough.
Yeah,
So,
I'm amazed at your capacity for production.
yeah, well, we're entering into fall and winter, so maybe productivity will necessarily decrease. We'll see. Try to get into those rhythms,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, we did. So we have a new publication called Poetics of Synthetic Language. It was released last Friday. We had an event at our space. Uh, so the question we're curious about is what happens in a world where more language is made by machines than it is by people, and not just in terms of the substance, like the content of what comes out, but what does it mean materially? And we're already seeing this, like Amazon's nonfiction offerings have taken a huge hit because of how easy it is to basically use an AI program like an agent to write a nonfiction book and then publish it on Amazon. And so people's trust has really shifted because they don't know which books are real and which books are created by a machine. But we're going to see more and more of that. And so, with some funding from the Canada Council for the Arts, we had 9 artists and creators, not all artists, different folks, and we did a collective exploration of these questions, and then we went to Milan last year to engage with the publishing sector there, because Milan was one of the first, was the first major publishing center outside of Germany after the printing press, and so they have this long history of watching as the printed word evolved and how it affected the society around it and how the society around it affected it. And a lot of the claims about like printing back then were very similar to what we're hearing about AI right now. Like it's gonna cause an amplification of like these marginal positions, and it's gonna create ungodliness, like it's gonna move people away from the church. And even though the Bible was one of the first and most frequently published books from the printing press, and there was all of these sort of fears that are being repeated. And then we also looked at plastic in the introduction of plastic, which was seen as liberatory when it first sort of was released. Like plastic allowed for things to be built that people couldn't maybe afford otherwise, like furnitures and household appliances and different objects that often required more craft in the past. But then plastic allowed them to be produced cheaply and at large numbers. And so that is the publication, is the reflections of the 9 of us that took part in this process. And it's a beautiful little book. It was designed by Mita Fiore, who's an Italian book designer that we've worked with before. And then we printed it in Milan, actually, and are now making it available. It's a fun little thing. And lots of like just a fascinating group of people that came together. So lots of different perspectives and lots of different approaches to bring to the question. And so no answer, but lots of potential answers. And then folks can step into that and say, all right, this makes sense to me. This makes sense to me.
I can't wait to receive my copy.
Nice. And we appreciate it. Yeah. It's been like I mean, there's only 100 copies. So I think that's probably part of it. It's also as an object, it's like a little sculpture. Like it's really quite beautiful. But we've been really happy. People have been very interested. So we're hoping, yeah, we're hoping that people enjoy it.
Well, I'm sure I will, and I like what you're doing, and I want to support you in that, and get the word out about the work you're doing, because I think you're approaching the world that we live in a unique way, in ways that other people are not, and you're being very thoughtful as you approach kind of the chaos of the time we're living in, and I think you should be appreciated for that.
No, I do appreciate that. And I think, yeah, I think Like I think this the potential to sort of have this relationship with the world that's coming is available to a lot of us, but then there are a lot of systems that sort of conspire to make it more and more difficult. And so I like my own pig-headedness maybe is a part of it. Because it's there are easier paths. So like I think each of us we could have made choices where things would be easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think part of this is also like how do we make it easier for other people that want to answer or want to inquire into similar questions, make it easier for them. And so a lot of our work is supportive of that as well, trying to create residencies and funding opportunities and spaces so that people can come up with their own questions and answers, and then they can then share it, and then the sort of marketplace for solutions grows as a result. We're not always obligated to sort of buy from the same shelf.
I think there are a lot of people who are asking questions, particularly questions about meaning, but their life experience, their training, their talent level, whatever it may be, they don't have um, those things that other people have that enable them to venture out into the unknown and create something which then becomes something that other people attach themselves to and then cherish, and it makes a difference in their lives. I think there are a few of us who are like that. I'm not sure I'm even one of those people, but I certainly feel like I'm a connector of the people that, like you, who are creating things that other people need to know about. And to me, it's with each passing month, I've become more excited about the future than less. And I treat AI as just another technology that we're going to adapt to, and it will become as marginalized as the computer has become marginalized. It'll just be used for whatever people choose to use it for, rather than it somehow becoming a dominant thing that no one can control. I don't see that happening because we don't have the initiative or the ambition to do that. I don't think most people have the ambition to want to do that. But what they have the ambition is they want to live a happy life or fulfilled life. They want meaning in their life. They want to have good friends. They want their families to be healthy and whole, and they want to be able to be able to walk across the street to their neighbor and say, "How are you doing? I know you have had a hard time this week." That's what people are seeking, and it's the complexity of the world does not make it easy for that to happen. But if we talk about it, if we model it, then other people can learn from that, and maybe they too can step forward and become examples for us all that the world is yes, the world is going to change, but it doesn't mean it's going to collapse into dust.
Yeah.
It just means it's going to change.
Yep. And then we have a responsibility to respond to that change, right? And
Absolutely.
and I think like these like the people that administer these systems, reducing social complexity makes it easier for them to do what they're doing, right? Like I always talk about the automated tellers because I think it's such a strong example, but like those machines are trying to organize us to be more efficient. And then people resist. And now a lot of places are removing those tellers because, I mean, there's different ways that people resist. Theft obviously is one big one, but in sort of less trespassy ways, people are demanding human engagement, and they're demanding some care in those transactions and relationships. So I think you're absolutely right. But it does require us to see our responsibilities, to make meaning, to engage with changes in productive ways. And it's so easy to sort of say, no, I'll let someone else do that. Like that's I don't want to undersign myself to that. I'm just gonna do my own thing. And that, and then we sit on our rights. We say, well, I have certain rights, and I'm gonna I'm going to defend those rights, and I think that's also important. But we tend to push the responsibilities to the margins, and so I think it's important also to talk about what individual and collective responsibility looks like. And I think art making is a way of inviting people in to answer those questions, to say, okay, this is one way I might be responsible. And not responsible meaning like culpable, but responsible meaning I can respond, the ability to respond. And that's what I feel excited about, right? Like a billion people responding is glorious, because I do love people. I share in your love of people.
Well, when I wrote my book Circle of Impact, I I said that my purpose was to help people take personal initiative, create impact in their local communities. And I've been saying that for decades. And then someone said, "Well, what's your goal?" And I said, "I had thought about a goal. That's just my purpose."
Mhm.
And I finally decided that my goal was to see 1% of the world's population take personal initiative to create impact in their local communities. And then I was asked, "Well, how are you going to do that?" And I said, "I'm not. I don't know how to do that. That's just my goal. And if I say the goal, then someone else will know what to do with that. And someone else in their local community will know what to do with that. And they'll help other people in their local community do that. And the aggregate, rather than that being a top-down centralized plan, the aggregate will be this highly dispersed, bottom-up, um, emergent leadership experience in the world." So
I love that.
and when I wrote those words in December of 2016, was it 2016, 2017? I was just writing words at that point. I mean, they were true to me, but here we are, almost 7 years later, and I see it happening. Little bits of it happening, but it's happening, and I'm thrilled by that. I'm humbled by that, because it means that it means nothing in terms of, it means you have succeeded. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that there is something inherent in who we are as human beings, where our desire to make a difference in the world needs to find some kind of outlet, and people are finding that outlet now, and I just want to celebrate that and encourage people to act on it.
Keep doing it. Yeah. Yeah. I love like this idea, like I forget who told me this, but that like if your goal doesn't extend beyond your own lifespan, then what are you doing? Like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
if your goal's the same shape and size as you are, then it's just a different kind of self-interest. And so being asked like, how are you going to do it? I agree. It's not even the right question, right? Like, I'm just going to push in that direction
Yeah.
until whatever time I'm given is gone. And then hopefully someone else will pick up the load and will push as well. And more people will join me along the way, and they'll step off when they're no longer able to push. But yeah, I feel that. And it's hard. Like it's hard right now to be the one that says, you know what, I want there to be meaning. I need there to be purpose. Things need to change. And that kind of courage, I think we also need to celebrate when we see it, because it's hard. Even if it's something we don't agree with. I think it's, that we have to applaud courage where we see it, moral courage in particular.
I totally agree. And what I find is that, because I have no fear in starting a conversation with someone, there's no resistance. Um, that I find that every conversation I have um, ultimately allows that person to say, "This is who I am and what's important to me." And then that is where I say, "Well, how can I help you fulfill that?"
Mhm.
And they say, I don't know. I said, okay, well, let's just talk about that. But that's that interaction that we have with people is, I think, is where a lot of this is going. And I think the product of the unintended product of COVID was it forced people to recognize they really do need one another. And so, and you're working on that there in Toronto, and I'm working it on here through the podcast, and I think it's an exciting time. And 2 years ago, I would not have thought that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hopeful as well. And I mean, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's naive, but I human beings are beautiful. And when they're given conditions to do beautiful things and to sort of imagine a beautiful life, they do and they can. And so yeah, I'm with you. I feel better about the future than I have in a bit. Which is surprising to some people, but it's the ingredients are there.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm grateful that you came on. I love what you're doing, and I love that you're using art as catalyst for community coming together, and it's not art on the wall, but it's art as expression, and
Yeah.
I really love that. So.
And I do want to like I say the word art and even like I twitch a little bit because like we've all been so conditioned that art is not for us, right? And I grew up no art. I mean, at least nothing recognizable as art in my family. So it's I don't come to this with any sort of preconceived affection for it, but making meaning and expressing and representing what's going on in ourselves and our community, it's like the most natural thing we can do with other people. And as long as we pull it away from sort of its preciousness or its elevation or its distance from everyday people, I think it still needs to be a central part of what culture is. But unfortunately, it's become that. It's on a wall, right? It's got a price tag, and you look at it, and you don't touch it, and I don't think that does us or art any service.
There are a lot of concepts or a lot of ideas that have been afflicted with hierarchy. Art is one of those. That's up here. Leadership is another one of those. There are few leaders and many followers. And I say no. Leadership is just a person taking personal initiative to create impact, which means everybody can be a leader. And the standard conventional thought about that doesn't like that because it removes that hierarchy. So it's the hierarchy of initiative, hierarchy of the individual, and it's it's emerging as something more powerful, but it's still a challenge to see if that's where it's going to end up. So
Sorry, please.
I was just going to say thank you for being here, and we can obviously have another conversation later in the winter, maybe as you
I
wind
would
down
love that.
the
Yeah.
next thing.
Yeah, I do love these conversations. Yeah, we're going to be launching a program in the winter, navigating a polarized world. And so that's something that I'm excited to talk about. Who knows what else will happen? But I'm supposed to be in South Korea in January as well, looking at some sort of tech and nature-based works there. But yeah, lots of good things happening. And I so appreciate this. I so appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about this. It's always such a pleasure. I love the thoughtfulness and the care and the love you bring to these conversations. So thank you.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And I thank you all for watching, and hope you take away something here that maybe encourages you to pick up a pen or a pencil and draw something that reflects something that you heard or something that you felt during this time we've had together. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddy Network podcast. Bye-bye.